morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. We're going to get started shortly, so give us about 1 minute here. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining today's Johnson Controls webinar on insider threats, the cybersecurity threat in the data center space. My name is Michael Zarrilli. I'm Executive Director for the Data Center Solutions business at Johnson Controls. Want to welcome you today. It's a very exciting topic, obviously, one that's ever present in the newspapers and obviously top of mind for all of us here. So just a few housekeeping items to start off with. For any questions, please go ahead and include them in the chat box. We will aggregate them and bring them up at the end of the presentation. So please go ahead and feel free to add any questions at any time during the presentation. And then second, just wanted to make an announcement about Data Center World, which is coming up from March 19th through 22nd. Johnson Controls will be there showcasing our product portfolio across our different infrastructure systems. So hopefully those of you who are attending, looking forward to seeing you there. We'll be at booth 621. So excited for that event. So with that said, why don't we dive into it? Wanted to go to the next slide here and really just kick off by demonstrating what Johnson Controls is doing in the data center space and talk about how we're approaching this market. And so as we think about this market just broadly, we really are focused on attacking 4 key challenges. Those are efficiency, reliability, security, and flexibility. On the efficiency side, obviously aimed at reducing TCO. And part of that is both from a PUE perspective, but increasingly in terms of importance, a WE perspective. From a reliability perspective, as you all know, reliability and uptime are the name of the game here. Any downtime cannot be upwards of $9,000 per minute for a data center. And so we're ensuring that reliability throughout our entire product portfolio. Security, obviously we're here today to talk about insider threats, so we'll get at a portion of this, but really focused on securing data centers from an access, intrusion, and video perspective, but also from a cybersecurity perspective with regard to our products. And then working with data centers on flexibility. And this is really around the build cycles in terms of standardization and modularization so that data centers can build most efficiently and ensure that their build is being done on time as well. So if we flip to the next slide here, I want to kind of start zooming in on JCI's product portfolio within the data center space. And it's quite extensive, ranging from building management like BAS, such as Metasys, to fire, both from a fire suppression and fire detection perspective, to security. Again, we'll deep dive that, but access control, video, intrusion, and connected converged security. HVAC equipment, anything from chillers to air handlers to rooftop units, and then complementing that from a lifecycle perspective on the service side. So really, what we aim to do at Johnson Controls is work with our data center providers from beginning to end, designing products that really meet and help your data center become as most efficient as possible, and then getting those products installed within the data center, and then obviously making sure that they are efficient and up in terms of their lifetime, and providing maintenance and service thereafter. So with that said, flip to the next slide and we'll double click on what these products are. And so I just want to call out a few key ones. So obviously on the HVAC equipment side, Johnson Controls in York, known for their water-cooled centrifugal chillers, also the air-cooled chillers on the YVFA side. Some exciting announcement was around direct evaporative cooling unit. This is a new product, one that is industry-leading performance, one that has dedicated manufacturing lines with very good lead times, and something that we're excited about at Johnson Controls. From a building management system, Metasys is our flagship product. It has great functionality within the data center space, and it's growing ever more present in that space in terms of how we can help our data center providers ensure uptime and ensure reliability of their equipment and efficiency of their operations. On the fire side, I mentioned fire detection and fire suppression. Some products to call out are the acoustic nozzle for gaseous suppression. This resolves any kind of decibel issues that might come out of an event where suppression is released. Water mist nozzle aimed at reducing water while maintaining the same kind of capabilities from extinguishing the fire, reducing water consumption by about 80%, so highly efficient and effective, and then complemented by the Energen iFlow system. From the security side, we'll dig into that today, so I'll skip over that one. And then on the service side, obviously providing kind of lifetime service and maintenance, but also providing programs for our data center providers in the form of chiller replacement. Really, a lot of y'all have pretty extensive operations in multiple sites, and really making sure that they're as efficient in where we can replace and get higher TCO and PUE out of it, or lower PUE, excuse me. We will implement this program and efficiently transition those chillers. And then lastly, on centralization of monitoring, both on the fire side as well as with chillers, working with a lot of our data center providers to centralize a lot of that monitoring, driving out efficiency in those pieces of equipment. So if we flip to the next slide. So why we're all here today, and kind of the excitement here, at least for me, is why focus on insider threats? And so I started talking with the folks that we'll be presenting today, and we started realizing that this is ever more present in the space and only growing. So about 90% of cybersecurity professionals feel vulnerable to insider threats. I imagine that's why everyone is on the line today, and we all fall within that 90%. 53% of cybersecurity professionals confirm they've experienced an insider attack over the past 12 months. It's a pretty astounding fact. Even more present is 7% of organizations feel that this will become ever more present in the future and grow in terms of frequency. Now, what does this mean? Obviously, we don't want employees, business partners, or contracted workers or other folks stealing any kind of intellectual property or consumer information, because there's a lot of negative outcomes as a result of that. And that can come in the form of PR, come in the form of customers leaving. And a lot of these events really cause quite significant financial costs to the data center providers, typically between $100,000 and $500,000, but in 24% of the instances beyond $500,000. And a lot of the time that's way beyond $500,000 in the millions, and possibly verging on the billions in some exceptional cases as well. So this is a real threat for the space, and one that we are looking forward to discussing what Johnson can do to really help prevent these insider threats. So for today's agenda, we're going to have John and Donald kind of walk through our offerings. Now, John is going to spend some time on the access side and video side and walk through some of the capabilities and what we should be looking out for as we anticipate potential threats. And then Donald's going to talk about our Connect to Converge security and how this integrated kind of digital offering really helps us in the space and helps our data center providers become more secure. So with that said, I'll turn it over to John, to take us through the next section here.
Thank you, Mike. And yeah, I look back over my 24 years in the operational technology space. I realize that I've kind of handled several sides of this. First, starting off with deploying systems in the field, working for system integrators, and then working with manufacturers on the physical security systems, and then most recently becoming full-time on cybersecurity for Johnson Controls. We've been able to look at risk mitigation for threats of all types, including insider threats. And I wanted to start with it. It was a great background that Mike gave on the statistics and on the impact of how frequently these can actually happen. But a little bit more about what attackers are looking to do. And of course, some of it's intentional and some of it's unintentional. Where it's intentional, they're looking to cause, in some cases, disruption with denial of service attacks and things like that. But there's also the goal of theft, trying to take both something physical, like equipment from the space, as well as something that's digital, such as identities, personal information, and intellectual property. And so all this is on our mind as we try to solve these problems. Taking a look at it, realizing that we don't want any disruption. It's not an option, but we look at this as a risk mitigation. But we first got to understand and calculate the risk here. And we do realize that it can be external threats, and these are the internet hackers, and that's usually what comes to mind first. But we do find that actually a lot of these incidences are more associated with internal threats. And as far as the internal threats, it can be an employee, it could be a contractor, a visitor to the site. And this is where they get a little more physical access than somebody sitting off on the internet. And with that physical access, actually the risk goes up because it's a little easier to, in some cases, to penetrate if the right safeguards are not put into place. So we need to be able to detect and act on these and prevent those situations even when they have the physical access. And then we have another component. I always want to bring this up because this comes down to your planning, and it comes down to how well you execute on the deployment and the configuration of these systems. It's the unintentional threat. And here we've got people trying to do the right things, but they miss a step, or they don't have enough knowledge on what really needs to be protected or how to go about these scenarios. And we call this the unintentional threats. And it results in a poorly managed system that doesn't provide the sufficient level of protection and detection on these events. And when you add all this together with the external threat, the internal threat, and the unintentional threat, this is your total risk. And we're trying to bring that down. All right, so those bad actors will always be out there, so we can't address it from that point of view, but we can put those safeguards in place. And we know this is causing disruption, and a lot of this is, the big disruptions are actually disruptions to data centers. This is where it can have the greatest impact. The city of Atlanta was faced with this recently, in the last year here, where there was ransom associated with this. So that's another thing we talked about theft, but this is actually putting the systems at hostage and demanding payment. And this was the case in Atlanta, and it got to the point where people can pay their bills online. People, they had to go back to manual processing, pull out the old forms, and they couldn't even hire employees. That was suspended. So that's a big deal. And then services that are running on the cloud, which are advertised as security benefit, like TeamSafe, and they had this event last year. And this is a monitoring app aimed at parents, and the servers that they were responsible for to keep their service going were publicly exposed, and this had personal data on it. It leaked parental email addresses, Apple IDs, device names, device identifiers. And then another incident, I mean, of course, I could go on forever with stories of breaches, but healthcare is on people's minds because those medical records are very sensitive. And we had like an incident in Singapore with their health provider, Sing Health, and there was over 1.5 million records that were exposed, and it included the prime ministers. Right, so there's a lot at stake here. I just wanted to continue to drive that home. So it's very important to have a good plan in place, and I think even reviewing policies, and a lot of companies and already have their policies in place, but to make sure they're really covering the right things, and sometimes it's to really know if you have a good plan, you have to test the plan, and it's good to run through war game type scenarios. What if? We even run these internally at Johnson Controls, and we do the same thing, and do our processes work well, and then you can have a stronger plan and make sure you're using the right technologies. So it's not just choosing the right technologies, it's using them in the right way based on good policies and good planning. So let's dig into, at this time, some of the solutions, and I'll look at it here first on the access control side, and what we're doing at Johnson Controls to address insider threat with these products. Now, right away, you put an access control system on a door to a data center, and you've got an overt deterrent. So, when you think of inside threats, you can even have good actors meaning to do the right things, but they just don't know. They don't have the situational awareness. If they see a locked door, they're like, okay, I probably shouldn't be in there. I won't go in there. You also even have another situation where it could be somebody trying to do the right thing, but they're circumventing policies. And it's like, okay, I gotta restore this service. Customers are waiting. It's costing the company a lot of money. No one's around to help me, so I'm just going to do my thing and get the service up and running. But in doing so, they're circumventing policies. But again, if they're going in and they're having to badge in, and that's a transactional record that goes in the system that can be pulled up in an investigation, they'll think twice about circumventing the policies. They'll try to do it the right way. So we're trying to drive good behavior with these insider threats, particularly the unintentional ones, or the good actors. The next step we can take in this is enforcing those policies that were set up in the plan. And this is where technology can step in and help in these circumstances. First of all, we have some traditional practices, like with a data center. Typically, you don't want to have one person in the data center at a time. All right, you want somebody watching them, or at least a peer. When you have more than one person, less bad things are going to happen. And so there are rules within our access control systems that can say no one person will do an area count. We'll have an in badge and out badge, and we'll know how many people are in the data center, so there'll never be just one person there. When you come with people with lower clearances, like visitors and contractors, having that escort with them is important. So how do you assure that escort is with the person that requires an escort? Well, the access control system can make sure that the escort is badging in within a few seconds of that visitor. But what if that person was to leave their escort? Well, we can use technologies now, such as wearables, that the badge itself knows the proximity of the escort and will change color. So anybody that's in the room who may not know who their escort is, will say, wait a second, the badge has turned red. Their escort must not be here. Other technologies, we can employ things like anti-passback. So you can't just slide the badge under the door and let the next person come in. Tailgate detection, somebody slipping in. So if you have a man trap, that's a very good way of preventing tailgating. And finally, multi-factor authentication. This is something that is recommended for critical environments. Certainly, when you're doing authorization, it can be something you know, something you have, something you are. And multi-factor has more than one of those categories. So I can't just give a badge to somebody. I can't just tell them my PIN number. They actually have to present maybe their biometric, which is a lot harder to transfer. And even if there's an older hardware reader, Johnson Controls has figured out ways to provide multi-factor authentication in those situations where the technology isn't quite yet updated on the reader side. And now we can use your mobile devices as a means of putting that second factor, your biometric, in on those older technologies. So that gives you a lot more assurance that the person you're authenticating is the person who they say they are. And then we can get into permissioning. So authorizing people to the right areas goes a long ways at preventing the insider threat. They should only be assigned to what they need to know. So we can follow all the best practices here. We can issue authorizations based on role. So we have role-based access control. We can then assign them based on what they need to have access to. And we can assure that it's not, in critical environments, we can make sure that it's not just one person adding the authorization, but maybe they also have to have their manager or a certain class of person authorize that access. So there can be checks and balances here. Separation of duties, so one person isn't doing all the functions, and this is all about how you plan and set up your permissioning. And Johnson Controls Access can facilitate those best practices. So this all comes together with an access control solution that can act as a deterrent, can perform the detection. We're also putting analytics to look at trends, et cetera, and more intelligence. So this gives you that artificial intelligence, AI, so that there's a lot of data coming into these systems. So to be able to filter them down and only look at more likely events and get rid of the false positives and focus on that. Putting the proper cyber defenses, using higher assurance readers that have encryption. And the other important factor in the access control solutions is to have resilience. This needs to, we've got critical systems involved here that having the fault tolerance and disaster recovery redundancy in there is an important factor. Let's take a look now at how video products can also address insider threats. These complement the access control. There's some similar concepts here, but it fills in some other gaps that access control alone cannot deliver. Again, it is an overt deterrent. If somebody sees a camera up there, they know that their image is being captured. They know this is going to be recorded. They can also assume that there is a security guard or other security personnel monitoring that camera. A lot of times, a data center typically doesn't have a lot of people in them, unlike a lobby where you've got a lot of people there. If somebody goes into the data center, that may need attention every time there's somebody moving in or moving out of the data center. So having that camera there can act as that deterrent. And that video system, as we were mentioning, it's doing detection. And because that guard is monitoring a lot of things, in some cases hundreds of cameras are in a site, or even more, and to be able to call your attention to the right camera if there's a particular event. Motion, loss of video alarms is the first step in detecting changes in occupancy for those data centers. But we want to put a little more intelligence than just motion alarms to filter it down some more. We're able to, from our Alestra cameras, to do analytics right on the camera, generating events right out from them. We can detect things like abandoned objects, just like in an airport. If it's an explosive or whatever, you want to call attention to something just left there. Direction, is it moving in or moving out? Dwell, crowds forming, objects being moved, removed. This picture, was this fellow really supposed to be removing that monitor from the data center? Or it could be a hard drive, something with the data on it. And being able to detect a removable object can really call attention to that potential event. Linger, exit, queuing, etc. All these analytics, this artificial intelligence, is bringing a lot more rapid response when there is an incident. Taking it even further, these rules can be set to schedules. So if there's times a day where there's no access to the data center, then we can change the rules. But what I think is really important is on certain situations to have business logic that can be programmed so that when there is an event, it's not just recording that camera, but that guard that's sitting in front of the station, it's popping up the right camera in front of them so they can draw their attention to it, triggering, having that automatic trigger. Going even further, we're doing what we call deep learning with our video signals. And to facilitate this, we're putting in graphic processing units into our NVRs that optimizes those NVRs for analytics. It needs a lot more processing power to be able to do this type of calculation. With this deep learning, we can more accurately count and track people. Certainly, we've got our card access system that can be set up with in and out readers. That can help with the counting, but also by having the video as a second input on who's in the data center is valuable. And this all can be combined with a full suite of analytics. It can this deep learning, for example, can tell the difference from somebody walking across the data center to a cart being pushed. So it won't count the cart and the person as two. It will count it as one. So it's important to get that counting correct. Just like with access control, cyber defenses are very important. Now, I'm calling attention to it on this side, but I could have raised the same points on the Johnson Controls access control system. These safeguards can be put in place to address the non-physical threats and assure there's limited access and only authorized personnel with a need to know can get to them. What goes a long way, and this is where it becomes increasingly difficult when you have like a card access system or video where you have users in them, is if somebody changes roles or they leave the company or they're no longer an approved vendor, to have that instantaneously through the whole organization be disabled or change in their permission. So they move from one role to another, they will no longer have access to that space or that software. If somebody tries to log on to your...
There's a question.
There's a question, okay.
Do I have to have other JCI products in my building for the Insider Threat product to work?
So these systems can work independently, but certainly if you combine them with others, the level of intelligence, the speed of the response can be improved. If somebody's trying to access the system, trying to steal somebody's account, it's important to have that account lock out after a certain number of failed logout attempts. These safeguards are in the system. We also have enhanced mode, so it assures that there's no default accounts that can be used, that these systems are always configured with unique accounts, and there's audit logs with them in them, so somebody can't repudiate their actions. Everything's recorded for them. And there's many other cybersecurity. These are some of the most fundamental ones listed here. We also want to make sure that the video is resilient. Just like with access control, that if there is a failure, that we have this continuity of protection. It starts with the camera, and we have a technology called Trickle Store that are in our cameras that we sell. And what that does, if should there be a loss in network connectivity with the network video recorder, data will then be stored locally on a memory card. And when network connectivity is restored, that data will trickle back into the NVR, and so all that data is preserved. To take it a next step in redundancy, making sure that one NVR is not as a point of failure, we offer redundancy in our NVRs, where those are constantly mirroring each other, and should one, and monitoring the primary, and should that primary fail, the secondary unit picks up the service until which time the primary is restored. So this all comes together, providing an effective deterrence, detection, with analytics, deep learning, and cyber defenses and resilience to really combat that insider threat from both a physical and a digital point of view with the cyber protection. And now we'll turn this over to the connected converged security.
Okay, thank you. So this is Donald Sullivan here, and I'm based in Cork, Ireland, with Johnson Controls, and I'm working in our converged security business, which is where we look at blending many of our different technologies that we've got across Johnson Controls to address use cases for our customers in the digital space. And we're seeing increasing demand for those types of services. And certainly when it comes to data centers, and I'll get into the kind of things that we're doing and the kind of protections that we're bringing. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So we're addressing insider threat with location analytics. So what we tend to see for data centers is that there's pretty good perimeter protections generally, but it's once you get inside a data center, and particularly in co-located data centers, where some of this starts to become problematic or can become problematic. Where are people going? What are they doing? Are they in appropriate places? Are they accompanied like they should be? Those sorts of questions, and how do you know? And if they're not taking appropriate behaviors, what do you do about it? So the kind of things that we're able to address are looking at things like unaccompanied visitor. An alert is created if a visitor who must be accompanied at all times within a data center or within a defined space or zone is flagged as unaccompanied. And that can be very important to know. So how do you detect that and flag that? That's because we create zones and rules that either can be physical or virtual within a data center. Abandoned badges, a badge is removed by accident or potentially malicious intent, and this abandonment can be detected and an alert triggered. The zoning and rules, the data center can have multiple geofences or zones created. So depending on how you want to configure your data center, what zones or locations are important. So we can configure it in any which way to represent those spaces. Suspicious rack access, a set of racks can be defined as a special zone or a space, and a tamper-proof door movement sensor detects a door being opened and checks to see if an authorized employee is by the door, and if not, an alert is generated. And in addition, we can have tamper-proof movement sensors to be employed to detect if the door is being forced open or if there's excessive force event on a rack structure, for instance. We can also pick up things like unauthorized dwelling, so dwell time can be measured and alerts can be triggered if a person spends too much time or an unusual amount of time in a defined area. Also, unauthorized movement of assets, so a tamper-proof tag facilitates the tracking of assets, and alerts can be triggered if an asset is moved outside a defined zone or by an unauthorized person. So both ways we can trigger that. And tailgating reduction, combined with what we do from an access control perspective, we can look at unauthorized persons can be detected even if they've walked into a secure space behind someone who has opened the door with a swipe of a badge. So it combines very neatly with what we do from an access control perspective and gives you another way of detecting tailgating. If we can move to the next slide, please. And so assessing insider threat with location analytics, the comprehensive location-based solution. So what we're showing here is that we are creating different zones, and you can have approved actions and restricted actions as shown here on the chart. But what it allows us to do is the zones are geofences that the customer can define over the floor plan view in our solution. And once defined, the rules can be defined and shown, and alerts can be generated by email or text. Key assets can be tagged via stick-on sensors, and similar rules can be applied to the assets. Rack doors can have tamper-proof stick-on sensors that detect movement and G-shock. And rules can be mixed to alert if a door is open without authorized persons, etc. We also can note that we've got different views that we can have if we move to the next slide of the analytics that emerge from this. So we've got different views that we can take that allow you to interpret what's going on from a behavior perspective inside the space, inside the data center. So we build a rules engine in our analytics layer that's sensor agnostic and cloud-based. People wear location-aware intelligent badges, and that helps us to pinpoint their location to very good levels of accuracy. Assets can be tracked and rack doors monitored, as I said, and we've got gateways then to uplift the data, and it can be plug-in or power over Ethernet powered. And that facilitates a number of different view types that we've got. So we've got a live view of whatever geofence zones we want to create, occupancy then within those zones, as I said, lone visitor visuals of people that are in zones where they're not accompanied, and alerts if they should be accompanied, and specific rules that you can customize and create based on the zones and the things of interest within the space. Our live view will check for occupancy within the zone, find a person or assets, their current location, see if it's moving, and it also helps in an emergency to quickly see if the population or distribution of people in a data center are there and where they are, and if you need to evacuate, that you know that everyone is out. Lone visitor gives a visual view flagging if we have two visitors and neither person is assigned to accompany them or they're not close by. In fact, if they're no longer in this corner of the building, these types of alerts, based on the rules that you apply to the different zones, will all alert you to that type of behavior. And that can be represented in the user interface that we have in whatever way makes sense for our customer. The zoning and rules, if we look at the occupancy level of a zone and we show any alerts, again, it can be a current view or historical view. So we can do this in real time. We can do it over time. You can do trending and analytics of the behavior within the data center for both people and assets, employees, contractors, visitors, etc. So the capabilities here, when you complement them with video or access control-based systems, gives you a blend of technologies, precision, cost points, etc., that mean that you can precisely manage, detect, and eliminate all kinds of threats within your data center. And so for us, it's a comprehensive suite of offerings that we bring to customers and tailor to their needs. So hopefully that gives you a good sense of what we are doing in location-based services and analytics within data centers. So with that, I'll hand back.
Great. Thank you, Donald and John. Appreciate the insights that you've provided. So for those who have any questions, feel free to input them on the chat. Some questions that have come in, I have two of them. So first one, clearly there are a lot of great products here. How should data center providers think about the deployment of these products and offerings, considering CapEx constraints?
So maybe I'll speak for the offering that I just dealt with, which is the locational analytics. That's because that's a cloud-based platform for us. That is something that we can deploy on a SaaS model. So it's a consumption-based model. So from a CapEx perspective, there isn't an upfront capital expenditure for those. Now, that's not true across all the offerings that have been spoken about on the webinar, but for that piece of the offering, that's how that is deployed.
Great, thank you, Donald. Donald, I got, I think, one more question from you here. For connected converged security, does it include on-prem and cloud deployments?
It is designed for cloud-based deployments. We do get questions around on-prem, and it's possible, but it's I would say compromised if you get to an on-prem, in that the analytics and rule-based engines, etc., that we have built use the infrastructure and compute power of cloud. And also to get to an on-prem deployment, it probably changes the commercial view of what we have to do in terms of install and support. So it's not impossible, but it is something that we would have to look into on a case-by-case basis as to how we do it on an on-prem type of way. So most customers that we speak to are happy and actually are seeking a SaaS-based offering and want to move to cloud. But we do understand there are certain people that are, for whatever reasons, find that not ideal for them and want to look at on-prem. But then that does mean that we have to get into a discussion around what does that on-prem deployment look like. So I think that's probably the best answer I can provide.
Excellent, thank you. So I don't have any other questions coming in at this time. So just want to thank John and Donald for taking us through the presentation today. Appreciate your efforts here. Want to thank all the attendees for joining. It was a pleasure having you. And this presentation will be posted up on our portal, as well as several other webinars that feature other topics like free cooling and all being data center related. So feel free to access those. With that said, hope everyone has a nice weekend and want to thank you again. And that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.